Okay. First, we'll start with horseshoe kidney.
Yes,
So,
sir.
horseshoe kidney is a very rare congenital anomaly of the fusion anomaly of the kidney. Incidence is actually it is not rare. If you look at the numbers, it is 1 in 400. The male to female ratio is 2:1, more common in males. It is different from normal kidney in the sense that there is a fusion at the lower pole. So, and also there is a difference in location, orientation of the kidney, and the vasculature, which is seen in the majority of horseshoe kidneys. Isthmus is between the lower poles of the kidney, and it is usually below the inferior mesenteric artery, and that is at the lower border of L3, which corresponds to the elbow when you are standing. And it is embryologically described as anywhere between 4 to 8 weeks of gestation, when the ureteric bud is sort of inducing the metanephric blastema, which are lying very fairly close in the crowded pelvis. And there is some abnormality which occurs in the alteration of position of the umbilical arteries and the common iliac vessels, which push the kidneys together, and the kidneys will fuse at the lower pole. And they will ascend in this way, and they will go up. So when they go up, normally kidneys will rotate when they are not fused. So here the kidneys cannot rotate because they are fused. So there will be normal kidney rotates 90 degrees medially. Here there will be no rotation. So the kidney will be facing with the pelvis anterior and the calycis posterior. The lower pole calyx especially is facing the spine. If you see the CT scan or the IVU. Majority of them will have arterial and venous abnormalities, which should be kept in mind. 80% will have renal parenchyma in the isthmus. The complications are easy to remember. Associated anomalies. 10% will have duplication of ureter. 33% will have PUJ. 50% will have VUR.
Sir, 2 minutes up, sir.
36. Okay, 36% of the patients will develop nephrolithiasis in their lifetime. Okay, I'll stop. Now you go ahead.
So
please go ahead.
Embryological theory is between 4 to 6 weeks when the notochord and hedgehog signaling are necessary for kidney positioning. So this is told as an etiology or embryogenesis. So that is why we see more of association of horseshoe kidney with vertebral and neural tube defects.
Correct. Notochord is required for the positioning of the kidney. That is what it is.
Association of horseshoe kidney can be divided into non-neurological and neurological association. Non-neurological like congenital heart defects, most common being VSD, neural tube defects, vertebral defects. Associated with trisomy 18, Turner syndrome, which is 7%, and in Turner syndrome, horseshoe kidney is seen in around 60% of the children.
Yes, correct.
And urological association, like we have already discussed, VUR, PUJO. PUJO might be because of insertion of ureter, also due to aberrant artery also can be the cause.
Yes.
And
usually the left kidney is slightly bigger and it is slightly higher in position compared to the right kidney, which is slightly smaller and lower in position. That is how it is positioned.
In males, in males there can be hypospadias and undescended testes in about 4%, and in females there can be bicornuate uterus and septate vagina in about 7%.
Yes, very good.
Duplication of ureter in about 10% patients.
Yes.
And
so there is a mnemonic for remembering the associated problems with horseshoe kidney. It is called as Sir William Turner is very multi-personality person. It's a little funny mnemonic, but Sir William Turner is very multi-personality person. I will share it later in the group.
Yes,
Sir William Turner, stone, Wilms, tumor, infection, VUR, multicystic dysplasia, PUJ. And what are the genetic syndromes? TET, Turner's, Edwards, and Townsbrock.
Yes, sir.
And how do you remember complications? Shut the barn, SHUT. Stones, hematuria, UTI, and tumors. Tumors in adults, most commonly RCC.
Yes, sir.
Other common tumor is TCC.
Wilms
and Wilms.
Yes, sir.
Wilms tumor is very common. Okay.
Go
ahead.
About 8 times higher risk than the normal population, and basically it originates from the isthmus.
Yes, correct.
When you're talking about obstruction to the PUJ, it can also be because of the isthmus, because the the ureter actually arises from the pelvis, which is situated posteriorly, it arches over the isthmus, and sometimes that can be causing the obstruction.
Yes, sir. Most likely it is the high ureteral insertion or aberrant vessels or the isthmus, sir.
Yeah. And very often they say we over-interpret UPJ in them because of the fact that the calyces are usually very dependent and they are posterior. So that is also the reason why there is so much of stasis in them and they develop stones.
Yes. 5% of the times it is lower pole some horseshoe, and 5% can be upper pole also.
Yes, and sometimes the isthmus can be behind the aorta also.
Yes.
Very, very rarely.
Yes.
Only 30% will have the normal vascular anatomy, that one renal artery to each kidney. But in 70%, it's usually duplicate or triplicate renal arteries, which may supply one or both kidneys. And isthmus usually gets a different own branch from the aorta.
Sir, 5 minutes up, sir.
Aorta, 5 minutes up.
Yes.
So anything I think most we have discussed now. Embryology, I think little more we have to learn.
Yes, sir.
If a main question comes, we have to write a little more about embryology.
Yes, sir.
And the risk of tumor, that we have to learn a little more.
Yes, sir.
And I think other things are okay. The treatment of stone, especially in children, because of the problem with the access to the calyces with the ESWL, I mean not ESWL, with PCNL, most often most pediatric surgeons prefer to do a minimally invasive laparoscopic pyelolithotomy for these children.
Yes, sir.
When it comes to treatment of large stones. SWAL also is sometimes not possible in children because of the fact that the kidneys are very small in these children.
Yes, sir.
And that is why
slightly because
most surgeons, pediatric surgeons prefer to do laparoscopic pyelolithotomy in these children.
That apart, treating the PUJ, a documented PUJ may sometimes be a problem because you don't know what the cause for obstruction is. And
yeah, correct.
And put again the same place. Maybe
Ureterochalicostomy, but most often what is done is mostly
modified Anderson-Heinz pyeloplasties.
Agreed.
Most often a complicated flap repair.
Yes.
But sometimes you have to keep.
So you want.
And commonest stock question in the exam is. Commonest stock question in the exam is, what is the level of the horseshoe kidney? Everybody answer.
L3. Isthmus is at the level of L3, L4. L3.
I thought it's at the
level. Below the IMA, at the level of the elbow when you are standing.
Okay. Generally at the level of L1, because that's a level where.
No, L3, Ramesh, L3.
Okay, L3, it's at the level of inframesenteric artery. I agree.
Yes, correct. L3 it is.
And what is going to be the approach for the pelvis in either laparoscopy or open?
Transperitoneal.
It is transperitoneal.
Transperitoneal. Please understand. In fact, the twisted I keep asking in the exams are, what are the indications for transperitoneal pyeloplasties? So this is one of them.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, we'll move on to next topic.
Yes, sir.
Ramesh, we'll move on to next topic.
Yes, sir, please.
Yeah. KTS.
Yes, sir.
Klippel-Trenaunay syndrome. There's a lot to talk. I will probably try to finish it fast. It is a sporadic eponymous syndrome. Normally, it is called as a capillary lymphatic venous slow flow malformation with overgrowth. It's also known as CLVM with overgrowth. So there will not be any arteriovenous anastomosis in this. In contrast to Park-Weber syndrome, which is similar, which differs in not having lymphatic anomalies, where there will be arteriovenous anomalies. I mean, AV communication. So there will be, you will have chances of this thing, what you call the heart failure occurring in them. It's a sporadic condition. It occurs due to a post-zygotic mutation in a gene called as PIK3CA. So it is also called as PROS, PIK3CA related overgrowth spectrum, PROS spectrum. It is due to the post-zygotic mutation in this gene. So there are the salient features I will tell you. There will be a vascular stain. Usually it occurs in the lower limb in 70% of the cases, upper limb in 11%, and combined upper and lower limb in 15%. When upper limb is involved, sometimes trunk is also involved. 4 characteristic features. Vascular stain is seen on the lower limb. The vascular stain can be of 2 types. Geographic, which resembles a country or a continent with distinct margins. This will always be associated with the lymphatic involvement. So it is a predictor of complications. Lymphatic involvement is a predictor of complications. Whereas a blotchy vascular stain with less distinct margins usually has no lymphatic involvement, so least complications. The venous involvement is persistence of embryonic avalvular venous structures, especially a lateral marginal vein and a sciatic vein. This is very characteristic of KTS. Lymphatic is hypoplasia of the lymphatic vasculature with vascular bleps with microcystic lymphangioma and in the limb and macrocystic lymphangioma in the pelvis.
Sir, 2 minutes.
There is overgrowth. There is overgrowth. Both I will hog a little more time. There is overgrowth, both soft tissue and bony in this. Okay.
Yes, sir.
The complications are, I will quickly tell the complications: clotting disorders, bleeding, limb length discrepancy, chronic venous insufficiency, cellulitis or septicemia, and pain.
Yes, sir.
The treatment is usually coagulation disorders will be treated, antibiotics for cellulitis, and important to remember that when you do surgical procedures in KTS, you should have peri-procedural prophylaxis to prevent embolism in these patients.
Yes.
The important pathogenesis directed therapy is mTOR, which is sirolimus, mTOR inhibitors, which is sirolimus, and PIK3CA inhibitor, which is called as alpelisib. Surgery is very rarely required, but sometimes it can be forced on the surgeon. I will stop here. We'll discuss later.
Yes.
Go ahead, discuss.
Sir, in this case, it's not only, it is most commonly hypertrophic limb, but in 10% of the conditions, it can be short or a hypotrophic limb as well. And
yes,
the differential diagnosis, as discussed, it is one of it is Parkes-Weber, and that is an inherited condition because of RAS-A1 mutation, while other condition is to be differentiated is CLOVE syndrome.
CLOVE syndrome, yes. So in this CLOVE syndrome, important to remember that you have to do monitoring for Wilms tumor.
Yes.
So no need for monitoring for Wilms tumor in KTS.
Yes.
Yes.
There is another syndrome called as a diffuse capillary malformation with overgrowth, DCMO syndrome.
Yes.
But also you must remember.
Athignomonic is the lateral marginal vein of cervelle.
Yes.
Which is an embryonic remnant.
Yes.
The other vein is the sciatic vein, which is also an embryonic remnant. And
yes,
there are various types of marginal vein depending upon the insertion, drainage into the either the saphenous vein or the branches of saphenous vein or the gluteal vein. And for the management, apart from the saphenous vein, it can also be connected to the femoral vein or the iliac veins and the IVC directly. So when we are managing such conditions, we should be very careful because there is high chances of venous thromboembolism and causing pulmonary embolism in case of 4 to 15% of the conditions.
Yes, very good. So you may need to put a IVC filter. Either permanent or temporary IVC filter may be required.
Yes. And
also you have to monitor these children for what else because of this thromboembolism.
DIC.
DIC, what else? With regards to cardiac and cardiovascular. Clear up.
Embolism.
Pulmonary embolism, multiple pulmonary embolism gives rise to what? Chronic pulmonary embolism gives rise to what? Pulmonary hypertension.
Yes, sir.
Pulmonary hypertension you have to look for in these children.
In few patients, pelvic veins may be involved and might be the cause for rectal bleed.
Yes, very good. Yes, and the lymphatic cyst may press on the rectum, give rise to extensive compression, and also on the bladder outlet, giving rise to bladder outlet obstruction.
Yes, sir. Sometimes may need endorectal pull through also.
Yes, correct. Yes. Important fact you people forgot is about the orthopedic management of this disorder.
The management depends upon the overgrowth of the tissue that can be excised. But when we are managing the venous part, we should be careful whether deep venous system is present or hypoplastic or absent.
Yes.
When it's absent, the lateral marginal vein of cervelle could be the only draining vein. So we should avoid sclerotherapy in such conditions. If deep venous system is present, then we can go ahead and excise the lateral marginal vein of cervelle. And for the orthopedic deformity, like for the limb length discrepancy, we can either use the footwear for the
footwear. Yes. What else is done orthopedic wise?
And some contractures release knee contracture.
Epiphyseal disc.
No, when the limb length discrepancy is more than 2.5 to 2 to 2.5 centimeters, what do you do?
Epiphyseal.
Epiphyseal is required, and it is usually deferred till the age of 10 to 14 years, commonly. And usually that is when the limb length discrepancy becomes more.
Yes, sir.
Then they will require, very rarely, they will require ray amputation, toe amputation, and all that, so that the footwear can be fitted, orthopedic wise. And extremely rarely, they will require amputation.
Yes, sir.
Sometimes lymphatic malformation.
Important, lymphatic malformation, important. Very important and very troublesome.
Yes.
So what do you do for that?
Crepe bandage.
Compression stockings.
Yes.
And antibiotic prophylaxis in case of cellulitis.
Cellulitis, correct. You can also give sclerotherapy.
Yes.
And for sometimes when those venous problems are there, you can also give laser therapy.
Yes.
And also, sirolimus is now tried, which has given excellent results. 0.8 milligram per square millimeter BD. They have given it in courses. And when sirolimus cannot be given systemically, you can apply topical sirolimus also.
Yes, sir.
And there is this new drug which is come in, alpelisib. It is a PIK3CA inhibitor. So it is just used in trials. So you have to get in contact with those people to get the medication.
Yes, sir.
So basically, we must remember that this is a typical rare vascular anomaly where multidisciplinary treatment is required, where many professionals are involved in the treatment.
Yes.
One of the main people involved will be the pain medicine professionals. That also you must remember.
Yes. 5 minutes up.
Okay. Okay. Fine. Anything there is a lot of thing in this thing. So maybe if there's anything which I have not discussed, I will share it with you.
Yes, sir.
Klippel Trinanwe is one person or two people?
Two people, sir. They're French.
Two people. Correct. French neurologist. Park Weber is one person or two people?
Two person. One person.
It is one person. It is Parks Weber. Parkes Weber. Parks Weber.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Where else you get Klippel in our medical syndromes? Two other places you will get it.
Klippel
field anomaly, where there is fusion of bones of the neck.
Yes, sir.
And then there is supposed to be something called as Klippel-Feldstein syndrome, where there is a overgrowth of the calvarium of the skull, which is usually benign, which doesn't give rise to any pathology.
Yes.
So two other places where Klippel will come: Klippel-Fehl and Klippel-Feldstein.
Feldstein.
He described KTS in which year? Both of them described it in which year? 1900.
Yes.
And when he described this, which one important one he forgot to include?
The lymphatic.
Lymphatic, very important. Yes, very good. He described only the vascular, that is the venous and the capillary, and the varices he described. He described the hypertrophy, which is very obvious.
Yes.
But he also said that there is no arteriovenous communication. Important thing he said. Whereas Parkes-Weber said that there is arteriovenous communication. Okay? So that is important thing which is differentiating these two things. Okay.
Sir,
Ramesh, anything you would like to add?
Sir, role of
endovascular
treatment in case of
role of what?
Sir, role of endovascular treatment in case of Klippel-Trenaunay syndromes.
Yes, very good. Excellent. Role of endovascular treatment. Yes. Instead of doing surgery, now most people are doing endovascular treatment. Yes, very good. So what are the endovascular treatments done?
So laser photocoagulation, sir.
Yes, yes, very good.
Injection sclerotherapy also.
Yes. When you are doing injection sclerotherapy, important thing is you have to put the IVC filter in these patients. Okay, because these veins are valveless. Important thing. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, we'll go to the next one. That is it is a very sad topic actually. Really sad topic. Non-refluxing, non-obstructive megaureter. It is like when we study Vedanta now, I am doing that. I am studying Vedanta now. You have a concept called as, you must have heard it. It is called as Neti. So when you study Vedanta, when they study the true nature of our existence and how we are related to Brahman, we have to say not this, not this. Neti. So this is how it is described: non-refluxing, non-obstructive megaureter.
Brilliant, sir.
So,
Brilliant.
Neti. So I will just tell briefly. Megaureter is second common congenital anomaly discovered antenatally by ultrasound. The commonest one being hydronephrosis. So this is discovered in 6% of fetuses when antenatal scan is done. This is related to urological abnormality. So 6% of fetuses will have megaureter. Out of this megaureter, there are three important concepts you have to remember: whether it is refluxing, whether it is ectopic, or whether it is obstructed. So refluxing is very easy to make out. You just do a VCUG and you will rule out refluxing megaureter. Obstructing and ectopic megaureters take a little more investigation to find out, but they will be finally sorted out. But non-refluxing, non-obstructive megaureters will take a little while for us to sort out, because it is by the process of elimination you come to that diagnosis. Now, when it comes to megaureter, the diagnosis is made only when the ureter is 7 millimeters antenatally. That is the distal ureter. The initial distal ureter diameter, if it is less than 10 millimeters and 11 millimeters, when you follow them up, they will have a spontaneous resolution. If the distal ureter diameter is more than 14 to 15 millimeters, then usually they will have no resolution, or they will only have resolution sometime later in their childhood or adolescence, or they will continue to have dilated ureters. The primary non-refluxing, non-obstructive megaureter is said to be due to a sudden increase in urine output which occurs in fetal life due to some sort of a transitional physiology, and which causes transient dilatation of ureter. These usually settle down.
Sir, 2 minutes.
So that's why they are called as primary idiopathic. The secondary megaureters, secondary non-refluxing, non-obstructing megaureter are due to polyuria. Commonest is diabetes insipidus.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Sir, etiology. One is due to high suspected high fetal urine output, and one more thing is probably antenatally there might have been some kind of an obstruction which would have relieved later. So it would have been a transient anatomical obstruction, sir. That also is probable etiology.
Yes.
Male is to female ratio is about 4:1, sir, and most common is on the left side.
Okay.
And then they have a course of where they gradually resolve on observation.
This male is to female, where you got that number?
Sir, one of the papers, one article I read, sir, about.
Okay.
On that non-obstructive, non-refluxing was there.
Okay.
And, many children resolve on conservative management. Generally, unilateral megaureters resolve by 24 to 36 months of life, and bilateral disease they resolve by 36 to 48 months of life.
Yes, and very often we continue them on
antibiotic prophylaxis.
Antibiotic prophylaxis, till about 12 to 24 months.
Yes, sir.
Postnatally.
Sometimes their symptoms can be UTI or pain abdomen. So that is when we might need to consider for treatment, like further treatment, further workup.
Okay, one question. Which is a refluxing and an obstructing megaureter?
One in the bladder neck, when the ureteric opening is in the bladder.
Yes, correct. Usually ectopic ureter, which is in the bladder neck or in the posterior urethra, which is around the sphincter, is a refluxing and obstructing. So when the patient passes urine, it will open and it will reflux. Otherwise, it is a obstructing because the sphincter will be closed. It will be obstructing. Yes, very good.
And in secondary causes, can we consider PUV, sir, where both refluxing and due to bladder this obstruction?
No, secondary cause for PUV is usually either a refluxing megaureter or an obstructing megaureter due to the ureter being kinked at the UVJ due to the hypertrophied bladder.
Yes, sir.
You don't get non-refluxing, non-obstructive megaureter in UVJ.
Yes, sir.
I mean PUV, sorry, PUV. If there is a obstructive megaureter in infancy below the age of 1 year, and you have to treat it due to either infection or due to dropping function in the kidney, what do you do?
Good question.
Obstructive megaureter which is obstructive.
Yes. Age
infant, less than 1 year old, small bladder.
Refluxing short tunnel reimplant.
No, I'm telling about obstructive. I have just deviated from the topic. Obstructive megaureter.
What it says is obstructive megaureter in a child where reimplant is not an option.
One is cystoscopy and digestion.
Dropping. No, cystoscopy and degestion you cannot do. Should not do.
Ureterostomy is an option.
Yes, very good.
And
that was the original option which was thought of. Yes.
And if bladder capacity is adequate, more than 50 cc, we can go ahead with reimplantation.
Okay, I'm telling that is not an option. That's what Dr. Ramesh also told.
Then no, ureterostomy.
What else can you do? There is one innovative surgical treatment which has been described. It is called a side-to-side ureteroneocystostomy. So you make a large anastomosis between the side of the ureter and the bladder, and you will have a refluxing ureteroneocystostomy. The other option is to do what is called as a refluxing ureteroneocystostomy or a ureteric reimplantation.
Yes.
Instead of doing disconnecting the ureter and reimplanting it in a refluxing manner, some people do just a side-to-side anastomosis between the ureter and the bladder.
Yes.
You understood now what I?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
yes, sir.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So can you?
One option is sometimes we do resorption and double J stenting only for one reason, that we do it just to see if any intervention really required or not. We just put it as a temporary thing to see, reassess the child after 3-4 weeks to see if the child's hydrouretus comes down, if the function improves, then some sort of definitive intervention is better. So it's just more like a trial than anything else, sir.
Okay. Yeah, somebody was telling something. Somebody else was wanting to tell.
How long can we wait on it?
Sometimes I get confused in the voice.
So if it is asymptomatic,
Priya, Vandana.
so Vandana.
If primary obstructive megaureter is asymptomatic,
Yes, sir.
if the function is not dropping, you can wait. You can wait. People have waited till 4 years of age also. And they have found that there's a definite incidence of improvement in the renal function. I mean, the drainage pattern with the maintenance of renal function over a period of time. And finally, you may end up doing nothing at all. Just like how we do for PUJ obstruction, where we do conservative management, and what is obstructed in the newborn period becomes completely non-obstructed at a later stage, at around 1 year of age. Same thing has been experience has been seen in obstructive megaureter, where there is a initial good function, and where on observation it is continued to be good function, maintaining good function.
Yes.
Okay. 5 minutes up.
Okay. Right. Thank you. Anything, Ramesh? Any observation? Dr. Ramesh has left his computer. Dr. Ramesh?
This is abstracting.
Sir, off the topic, sir, what would be the natural history of this neonatal PUJs?
About this, not reflecting on. This is abstracting.
What will be the?
Natural history of this neonatal PUJs. We have seen the poorly
There's
functioning.
an excellent paper. There's an excellent paper described by Great Ormond Street now, which describes the natural history of neonatal PUJO. They have described these things, the criteria. If the pelvis is more than 2.5 centimeters diameter, APD, if the kidney is palpable. Have you not read that Great Ormond Street paper? It's a classic paper where they describe that what can predict future possibility of surgery. If function is retained, if there is obstruction is seen on this thing with retained function, you don't operate in newborn, isn't it?
Yes,
Then
sir.
you keep following them up. So majority of them will not require surgery. That is what has been the Great Ormond Street experience. So they have predicted who are the people, who are the newborns, which are the newborns which will require surgery later on when you're keeping them under observation. You read that paper, Great Ormond Street paper, written by Dr. Philip Ransley and his team. Okay. It has come in the textbooks also. If you read Campbell or Kelly's King, it will be mentioned there.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
What are the states, indications for neonatal pyeloplasty?
Huge palpable kidney, with a significant reduced function of this one, sir, kidney.
When in any case, I'm asking, what is the most reliable method to do an isotope scan? Well, normally, we don't do isotope scans less than 4 weeks. So, if at all you are forced to do it, okay, like what sir is trying to suggest, there are certain indications where there's urgency. So, what is the isotope scan which will be useful?
EC scan. EC scan is.
Yeah, okay. EC or MAC3 is better, and DTP is not the right choice because it depends on GF. Okay.
Yes.
So, what are the other urgent conditions in which this is trying to imply? What are the conditions in which you need to address the PUJ much earlier than the standard 4 to 6 weeks?
Thin parenchyma.
More than that. Let us be more objective.
Bilateral PUJOs with raised creatinine, sir.
More than that, one is a palpable kidney, you said. Apart from that,
Kidney with PUJOs.
huh?
So solitary kidney with the PUJO with the signal.
Solitary kidney. Good one.
Yes. That's a good answer. Especially when you don't know whether the opposite kidney is having any function at all or not. Sometimes you see some cyst in the opposite kidney, multicystic kidney. But when you are suspecting very strongly that this is a solitary kidney, and which is proven later by nuclear scan, you have to do a pyeloplasty in that kidney. Yes.
Solitary
And
kidney.
there, yes.
Ars kidneys. Okay. So these are the conditions where you will actually consider to do much earlier. And the isotope scan of choice will be an EC scan or a MAC3.
And as when I said poor function at the time of birth, which can be accompanied by a thin parenchyma also. So poor function is an indication for intervention in the newborn period. Bilateral hydronephrosis with PUJ obstruction. It's a very, very controversial topic. So you will have to discuss very, like how you treat each kidney unit differently, how you assess them, and whether you need to do a VCUG or not. All those things you have to discuss when it comes to bilateral hydronephrosis.
Yes.
Sir, I have to acknowledge that this one is really interesting and keeps everybody on the toes. The last one I didn't attend, but this one is brilliant, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So this is something new I am trying. I have never done this before, but I thought this will be an interesting concept to cover 2-3 topics in one go.
Yes, sir. You did mention about this when we discussed, but I was not too sure how it is going to pan out. But the way you take it is brilliant, sir. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I mean,
Thank you.
I learned a lot more than others. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for the PGs for participating and also contributing greatly. Lot of new things we learn when we discuss with them. Always. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thanks, sir.